Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Stephen Erlanger from the New York Times, and it's a great pleasure to be here in this gorgeous place. Big improvement on last year, if any of you were here last year. The sound's supposed to be much, much better. We have a good panel whose names you can see to talk about this very fraught and I think becoming almost cliched issue of populism. What is populism? Why does it matter? The one thing I would just say at the beginning, having spent a fair amount of time covering parties like the AfD in Germany and Rassemblement in France and the Swedish Democrats and Geert Wilders and Brexit, I covered Brexit and Nigel Farage and so on, is the one thing I always try to remind people is if we have democracies, populists who vote for populist parties are voters. They have as much right to vote as anybody does, and they have the right to their opinion. And if governments are unhappy with the way they vote, they need to do more to understand why people vote the way they do. And there are all kinds of excuses people make about subversion and misinformation and social media. But in the end, it seems to me at least, and I've tried to write an essay about this, which is in the New York Times today, which many of you have. What are the discontents in our current system of democracy that leads to what you might call extremism, both on the left, let's be fair, there's Mélenchon in France, as well as on the right. So that's our theme. We're going to go in alphabetical order. I won't introduce everybody because they're up here. Marjan, sorry, off you go.
Well, thank you so much, Steve. It's a pleasure to be here. I want to thank the Athens Democracy Forum and especially Kim Conniff-Tabor for including me in this panel. I also want to take a moment to thank the Berggruen Institute. I've been a Berggruen Fellow for the past 3 years, and everything I've done, including my book and the organization that we launched about a year and a half ago, would not have been possible without the Berggruen Institute support. So I want to thank them. I want to thank my fellow panelists, and it is great to be here. To the topic. So, to the topic. Well, I'm going to push back. In the description for the session, it says, how can we inoculate people against populism? And I want to push back a little bit because I'm not sure that we're asking the right question. I think that what's really important, I grew up in Iran, and populism in my household was not a negative word. I've worked, before I pivoted to doing democracy work in the United States, was working in very closed environments, including Nicaragua and Ukraine and other places, North Africa, and a number of different countries. And I think that these movements are quite legitimate. And I think that the better question to ask is, what can we do as a pro-democracy coalition, a movement, to make sure that we address the grievances and the drivers of these populist movements in a way that inoculates them against authoritarianism? So I think that's the better question to ask. And in that context, one of the areas that we do quite a bit of work at FIDE North America is around voice. And we just, earlier this week, we published a report called Voice Insecurity, because one of the things that we find is that Americans, certainly across the US, are looking for meaningful platforms to be able to provide input. And they don't feel that. Now, when we talk about voice insecurity, we're not talking about people not being able to speak to their friends, to their neighbors, to write an article, to read an article. It's really about that connection between them and the government and feeling like they have input in government decision-making. And so we draw parallels with food insecurity, and I encourage you to take a look at the book. I have some 2-pagers that I'm happy to share with you afterwards. And that kind of in combination with some data that was released by the OECD last year in Drivers for Trust, which shows that there is a huge discrepancy between individuals across OECD countries that feel that they have low confidence in their ability to have input in local government decision-making and high confidence. There's about a 47-point difference between 20-some% low confidence and low trust and 60-some%. So, and we, in the work that we do with citizens' assemblies, time and time again hear from people who are involved in citizens' assemblies how meaningful it is for them to be able to provide input. And why is all of this important? Because when you feel voice insecure, you feel disempowered, and when you feel disempowered, you feel vulnerable, and when you're vulnerable, you want change, and messages of change resonate with you, as we see across different movements. And so it's very easy for you and your movement to be co-opted by authoritarianism. So should I speak a little bit in the US context, or we can leave it for later?
I mean, just to come back to ask you one of these questions that's always bothered me is, we talk about democracy, but we actually all live in republics. Mm-hmm. We live in representative democracies. So why do you imagine people feel so disempowered in what is actually a representative democracy where they get to vote?
Well, I mean, I think, Steve, part of that is the way that we describe our democracy, and you also kind of alluding to voting. I think what we're trying to do with organizations like FIDE, and we're part of a far larger coalition of organizations that believe in institutional reform, because we don't think that voting is sufficient anymore. We think that we need to think beyond elections, and we need to make sure that we create platforms like citizens' assemblies for members of the public to be able to be involved in between those elections as well.
Great. No, I mean, because I think engagement is part of the common conversation that democracy is supposed to be, and I think we're losing it to kind of more narrow passions.
May I build on that?
Please do.
Yeah.
I mean, it's over to you, Stefanos, anyway, but let me just briefly explain for 2 seconds that, I mean, you had started almost the reverse of Barroso, who started as a Maoist and ended up with Goldman Sachs. You started with Goldman Sachs.
I hope I don't end up being a Maoist. Steer clear. All due respect to the chairman.
That's right. So, and then headed Syriza for a time, and now run a movement. So explain part of why you've made that journey, and then whatever else you want to say.
Right. I mean, it feels odd to be talking about democracy and to be talking about myself in terms of, because it's supposed to be about the people, you see? That's populism for you right there. But I did start at Goldman Sachs when I graduated in 2009 from the University of Pennsylvania. It was a very difficult time to even have a job, let alone in finance. And I kind of saw those 5 years after the global financial crisis. And if you remember, we had Occupy Wall Street, and we had a lot of disenchantment from people, this fight between Wall Street and Main Street, the Tea Party, and all these movements that have since become what the US is today. And I will not go into an analysis of US politics because that's a whole different session. But the fact that the US, with all its checks and balances, is still so polarized tells you all you need to know. In the US, at Goldman Sachs, and in the space of banking, most CEOs are self-made. They don't come from families, or they have, let's say, succeeded with less nepotism than what takes place in Europe and certainly in Greece. And they are liberal. They are mostly part of the Democratic Party. That's not the case here. So I never, in my mind, I never had the conflict of being in finance and being liberal. Right. Well, I came here, and 2 years ago, I was in a state ballot list, which is 5% of the Greek parliament. And it's a ranked list, and I was, in an honorary spot, close to the bottom, so just as a volunteer for Syriza, the main opposition party at the time. And and I did this because I thought I saw a gap in terms of having a true progressive liberal center, which was the Syriza expansion from its leftist roots toward the progressive center. And that's why I joined that. I also saw the Tempe train crash. I mean, most of you know there is a hunger strike going on in front of Parliament because the families of the victims are unable to exhume their children and to discover, to find out the cause of death, what they actually got killed by. Was it the crash, a fire, what the fire was caused from? And that alone obviously shows distrust in democracy when you don't have justice as part of democracy. Anyway, so I was main opposition leader for about a year, and then I experienced the lack of regular internal party democracy, and we had an internal clash. And since then, I've started a movement for democracy, which is inspired by the values of the left. I'm not one to tell you that I think both sides are right. You may recall Donald Trump said that, back in the day in Virginia when we had neo-Nazis there. There's good people on both sides. No, I don't agree with that. I think the left has the moral right side of the history historically, and in terms of Greece in particular. But for me, that is culture, and that's the past. It's values, and politics today is very confusing, not so much because of ideology, but because of practiced politics.
Well, let me ask you this, because, there's a famous line in Texas that says the only thing in the middle of the road are yellow lines and dead armadillos. So middle of the road can be a dangerous place to be.
Middle of the road doesn't mean that you're not principled.
No.
It means you're trying to make things work, right?
But talk a little bit about the diagnosis of democracy as it is now that you want to change. What is it that you think has gone especially wrong, and why does it appeal particularly to young people who are mostly in Europe? When you look at the polls, they're voting for more extremist parties.
So this is where I wanted to build off where Marjan left it. Democracy used to be that we vote, and that was enough. We have some institutions, there's separation of powers and voting. Today, I think democracy means equity. It doesn't mean equality, but it means equity. It means that you want to have a fair share, a fair shot, decent opportunities, not equal opportunities, but many opportunities. The ability to shape your life, to pursue happiness, and to be able to recover when you have, a bad moment happen to you or to your family. When you see what's happening in the representative democratic systems around Europe, you see that while everything has changed in the world based on technology and globalization and climate change and AI, but based on technology, political communication has changed dramatically. How you do grassroots, micro-targeting, Cambridge Analytica, you may recall, everything has changed but the way representative democracy works. We don't need any more representatives to be going with a donkey or the horse, to Congress and come back and report after, a month or 2 weeks. The fact is, we know exactly what they're going to vote, when they vote, what they say, and that's why there's such a purity test for what they do. And that's why you have gerrymandering, which is in the US a big issue. In Greece, too, we have this issue of how we shape the jurisdictions and how that changes. So we need to have, I think, citizen assemblies, more referenda on the local level, use technology for true deliberation. Right now, deliberation on bills in Parliament in Greece is just sending an email to the ministry. That is not true deliberation. So, and we need to find ways to integrate technology in decision making.
Great, thank you. Yvonne, you think a lot about political movements. You've written a very good book about why the Brussels dream for Central and Eastern Europe has fallen short. You've written a lot about issues of identity. So this is as we would say, right up your alley. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. First, I'll say that there is so much light on
you're
us
sitting right
that if you have the feeling that we're responding like being into interrogation, this is the reason. Secondly, something in the support of the previous speaker. Listen, there is nothing wrong to start in Goldman Sachs. The real problem is if you're going to end your career there. And I'm saying this because
you're the Center for Liberals.
Even today, New York Times basically have been publishing the results of a research polling done by the Pew Research in 25 countries in the world. Some of them democracies, some of them authoritarian regimes. In 20 of them, majority of people want change. And most of them basically are not sure exactly what kind of change. And most of them basically don't believe that they're going to get it. So I'm saying this because the word populism is so attractive because it's so vague that anybody can subscribe. When we talk about populism, everybody's talking about something else. Do we talk about just certain political parties? Is it style of politics? What it is about? My major argument is that we are going to see a major change of politics as we know it, everywhere. Democratic and authoritarian states, both of them are not going to be the same. And for me, there are 4 reasons for this. One is demography. Listen, our societies are changing. In probably 10 years, 10 to 15% of the people who are on the Bulgarian labor market are not going to have the right to vote because they were going to be some type of foreigners. 30, 35 are going to be on the retirement age. 10 to 15 of Bulgarians are living outside of Bulgaria so they can vote, but they're not paying taxes. Is this type of democracy as we know it? What kind of economic problems you can solve with this type of a body politics? And then basically you go to technology. Technology is a major story for personalization of politics. Listen, when you don't know whom to trust, it's easier to trust a person than an institution. And this person can be different. They can come from the left, from the right, even in the middle of the road, but it's going to be celebrity politics a lot. And thirdly, and in my view, this is really very critical to me. Democracy is based on a certain understanding of future. First, that future is there. Secondly, that we can change it. And thirdly, that some problems are going to be solved today, but other problems can be postponed and to be solved tomorrow. So from this point of view, democracy is also the art of postponing, because this is how compromise works. So now look on the left. People who are for very legitimate reason obsessed with climate, they're saying, no, if we are not going to solve certain things today, tomorrow is going to be too late. And then go on the right. They have absolutely the same mentality when it comes to migration. Either you're going to reverse it now, or tomorrow is going to be too late. Listen, if people believe that these elections is the last elections that matters, democracy cannot function. There was a famous communist poet from my childhood who basically have a line, if this is the last and final battle, better shoot first. And this is what you're seeing. Part of the strong radical polarization of society comes of this idea of urgency. Nothing can be postponed. It's now or never. And I'm saying this because also the changes in the United States, the changing of the identity of the United States as a global political actor is also an important change. So trying to describe what is happening as a defense of liberal democracy, we are wrong. There is nothing more dangerous to defend the status quo that does not exist anymore. The problem is how to reinvent the system. The problem is basically how to deal with this change.
One of the things that you had said to me before was that when people feel that governments are complacent, that they're not responding to their perceived needs anymore, they get very attracted to activists, to people who do things, even if the things were considered undoable in the past for convention or even legal reasons. I think here of Donald Trump. And they don't much care always whether what's being done is good or bad. They appreciate the action.
Listen, it's very important in democracy on the election day what is represented, but also what is not represented. What is represented is interest, what is represented is values, but what is not represented on the election day is intensity. Who you really are ready to put all your life about certain issue has one vote. And I, who don't care much, have one vote too. Paradoxically, I do believe that now intensity has overtaken consistency in politics. You have politicians who basically are really rewarded for crossing borders, for being transgressive. Donald Trump is one of the examples of this. Many people are going to say, listen, not necessarily that I agree exactly with what he is doing, but he is showing the primacy of the politics. He's showing that if the government wants to do something, it can do it. Because part of the story before was that the government spends a lot of time explaining why they cannot do certain things. It became a competition of impotence. I cannot do this, I cannot do this, I cannot do this because of the central bank, I cannot do this because of the markets, I cannot do this because of this and that, and suddenly you have this revolt. It does not mean that people are going to be happy with the results that they're going to get. Because the intensity is also creating a situation in which the compromise is becoming much more difficult. And in my view, adjusting to this, trying to understand how this is going to work, is really going to be critically important. And this is a kind of a route in which we have not been before. For me, the story was, we normally talk about every regime, that it has historical limits. Listen, democracy in 1920s was not what we know in the 1970s, and what we're going to have tomorrow is not going to be the democracy of 1990s. And I don't believe that we're still prepared for this.
Well, we might remind the American Supreme Court that democracy isn't the same as it was for the founders. You know, anyway, now over to you. Pew, you've got the polling.
We've got the polling, but I'm a researcher, Stephen, so I go straight to the building blocks of this question, right? Populism sees the world as divided into two groups, right? You've got the pure and true people, and then you've got the corrupt elite. I follow a political scientist by the name of Kasselakis. He's written quite a bit on populism, and he says populism is not an ideology. It needs a host ideology. So you have right-wing populism, where the true and pure people are defined in nativist terms, and then you have left-wing populism as well. Let's not forget about that, right? Where the working class is the true and pure people. Now, Marjan's point is well taken. Why is this a problem? Well, it's because populism takes the distrust of institutions to an overdrive, right? So institutions are corrupt, therefore we cannot trust them. Democratic institutions, multilateral institutions are run by elites, and therefore they must be subverted, undermined, bypassed, all of the above, right? And we need a leader who understands the true and pure people, right? Who can get stuff done. What is happening in the world that is leading to this mainstreaming of populism? I would say right-wing populism in particular, our data has shown, has become a mainstream movement at this point. You can see in the election data, you can see in the public opinion data. Well, at the Pew Research Center, we do deep dive analyses of American public opinion, but we also study global public opinion. And there are three trends in the data that are just unmistakable at this point. And thank you, Ivan, for queuing me up a little bit on this.
It was for free, by the way.
We'll talk about that later. All right. Well, first of all, widespread economic doom and gloom and economic resentment. People feeling that their children will be worse off than them financially when we ask them, right? This is pretty significant. You know, what a parent always wants. My child will do better than me, right? My mother used to say, only two people in the world will be happy to see you do better than themselves. One will be your teacher, one will be your parent. But right now, we are not picking up this sentiment. Quite the contrary. Right? And I'll get into more. I mean, that people are not dreaming up this sentiment. It is also true in the economic data. Right? Second trend. Cultural issues can and do affect elections around the world, and they are manifested as attitudes toward immigration or anti-immigration attitudes, Christian nationalism in the US, religious nationalism elsewhere, and other nativist tendencies. Right? And there is a need for nuance to understand these nativist views, because now we have the voter data from the United States 2024 election, and there is a worst-kept secret in that data, in that Trump actually diversified his coalition in 2024. Fewer white people in his vote share, more Latinos, more Asian Americans, more Black Americans. So we must have a more nuanced understanding of how these nativist tendencies play out. Final trend, and then I'll turn it back over to you, is that we have a global crisis of representation. Right? People around the world are saying to us very clearly in the data that representative institutions are not working for them. Right? Elected representatives are not honest. They do not care about the needs of ordinary people. Right? So one data point I'll throw at you, I promise not to go into too many statistics, one after the other, and more to weave a story, but we asked about 101 political parties in our latest study in 24 countries. Just 16 of them got majority favorability rating in the country where they are established. In half of the countries, no political party got majority favorability rating. This is very clearly people saying that I do not feel represented. And not only that, the people are telling us the system needs major change, thank you, and one more important point, they are not hopeful that the system can change. So where does that leave us?
Thank you for that. I mean, one of the things that always strikes me is people's sense of their own position in the world. And one of the things Joe Stiglitz, the Nobel-winning economist, has always said, there's something called horizontal inequities. It's not that you, particularly in America, where we admire the rich people, we don't hate them, we want to be them, which is different from Europe mostly, you know. We don't mind their rich people. What we mind is when our neighbor, for systemic reasons, is doing better than we are, because maybe they have a long-term mortgage and we have to pay a rent, or we have kids who have trouble getting into college. And those are the resentments that seem to hit hardest. I want to throw one question open to anyone just quickly. One of the great debates, I think, one has it in Germany, where I live. You have the Alternative for Deutschland, which is at the moment not running 2 or just ahead in the polls, though polls are snapshots, but is very powerful in the East. Sometimes I think Germany's like Belgium. It's 2 different countries, really. And the debate is, do you include them? Do you bring them into power? Do you exclude them? Are they particularly dangerous as an anti-constitutional party? And yet, in Finland, in Sweden, in the Netherlands, in other places, you see parties being brought in to government as junior partners, which makes them implicit in government. And so I'm just curious whether any of you have a judgment about which is the best way to go. Or not. Ivan.
No, listen, it's different from country to country. To try to believe that all extreme parties are the same party is not true. Not to take the political culture. For Germany, this is particularly difficult because of the German history. But at the same time, to believe that you can easily isolate a party which is above 20%, it's very difficult. By the way, this was happening during the Cold War with the Italian Communist Party. For this to happen, you should have a very special international environment. If on one level, 1/5 of the German voters are going to go with AfD, and the Vice President of the United States say this is a good thing, it's very difficult to isolate them.
To me, it's not a question of is it better or not? It's a question of what is, right? I mean, yeah. We did see in the global election year 2024, I mean, 60 countries went to the polls in 2024. They're European elections. And the result of that election showed us that right-wing populism is now mainstream. So it is, right? It doesn't matter what should be in our mind, but this is the challenge. This is the reality right now.
Yes, that's good. And when you look at Italy, for instance, look at Meloni, I mean, look at Marine Le Pen. I remember interviewing her, 15 years ago. She's different.
Look, there is a risk. There's an upside and a downside to including them in government. The upside is that once you bring these populist parties to govern, they have to face the fact that their ideas are unworkable. They have to face the fact that, I'll give you one example. And I'll tell you what I think the Achilles heel is for Donald Trump. I think it's the cost of goods, the cost of living. This is something he's not going to be able to resolve. Why? There's 1,000 reasons why. And ultimately, capitalism has only worked with massive redistribution of wealth and a crackdown on oligopolies at times. Think about this for a second. Think how different the world today would be if Theodore Roosevelt hadn't broken down the Standard Oil and the railroads. Think about, do you really think we would have had the same innovation years out and productivity boosts if all that capital was held in these few families? How about now the massive tech giants that we have, the Metas and the Teslas and whatnot of the world? And the data, people feel disenfranchised in part because they're not part of that. Unless you have capital to have public equities to get dividends from it, if you're in Main Street and just trying to live, you can't do that. And so, same thing here with in Greece with the populist movements, is that they don't have workable ideas. The downside to including them in government is that they can be dangerous insofar as individual freedoms are concerned. Right. You cannot put in the bargaining table LGBT rights, human rights, the environment, just because you think it sells. There are some things that we need to be firm on, right? And so if there can be clear red lines on the rights that make a society work, then sure, let them play game and let them discover how the truth works. Let them hold them accountable on that. Okay. But that's not it. And I'll say one last thing very quickly. I think there is a huge crisis both in Greece and in other European countries, not so much in the US, of people wanting to join politics, to be candidates. They feel like they're going to be destroying their lives if they leave their job in the private sector, or if they go public. The shaming they get on social media if they make one mistake or anything like that. It's an extremely toxic environment, and especially in countries with low quality institutions like Greece, people are afraid to put their hand up and I want to make change. It's much easier to want to make change when, as you said, you have a host, which is, the people you want to go against.
Right.
But Stefanos, there's one important point there. The AI is not coming for politics jobs, right? So now in the US, the jobs data is back, right? And you are seeing high levels of unemployment among recent college graduates. So all is not lost.
Good.
In a certain way, the Belgians has a nice saying. They said, when the disgusted people leave politics, the disgusting remain. So if you don't have a pool of...
Yeah, I mean... it's very hard, even in America, to get good people to go into politics for all these reasons.
At least you have primaries.
Go ahead.
It's not just that it's hard. I think that young people in America are not interested.
Give us some optimism. Go ahead.
Well, I don't know that I can give you optimism because there isn't a lot of optimism. I think actually one of the, we often will kind of poke at the populist agenda and say that it's not working. But from where I live in the United States, I'm not sure that the Democratic agenda is really working, and I think that's part of the problem. I've lived in the US now for 20-some years, and none of this is new. We all knew this was coming if we had not ignored some of the problems that we were seeing, and I think part of the problem now is that Americans are still given binary choices, which is either, defend your democracy or you destroy your democracy, and we haven't come together to have a really strong reform agenda that actually inspires young people. And I think that that's part of the problem. I think the other part of the problem in the US, honestly, is that we still think that if Trump loses, we will win.
Right.
And that's not going to be sufficient. There isn't a lot of energy, I think, and it's understandable, right? The moment requires that we fight. But what are we fighting for?
Yeah, and also, you know, it'll never go back to where it was. I mean, the ground has shifted. We'll see how far. One of the nice things about this forum is it brings a lot of young people to engage. I know we have a question from a teen out front somewhere, so if one of you would, I see a woman with her hand up. Could you ask your question if there's some sort of microphone? I'm not sure we have time for two, but...
We're from the same team. Can I say it on your behalf?
Fine.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure being here with you today. On behalf of the Teens for Democracy group, we've got two questions for you. The first one being, how can we distinguish whether a populist leader is genuinely bringing to life existing social inequalities rather than exploiting discontent for personal or political power?
And the second one being, what institutional or societal safeguards can limit the influence of populism without undermining democratic principles themselves?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Would you like
repeat the...
Yeah, could you, I mean, it was very hard to hear, unfortunately. So particularly, could you repeat the last question?
Okay. What institutional or societal safeguards can limit the influence of populism without undermining democratic principles themselves?
Was that better?
So I think the question is how to distinguish when populism is undermining.
How do you limit populism while remaining democratic?
Yes. Marjan, I think you had an answer to this in the beginning, right?
Which
About
one?
how in your family it was fine to be skeptical of institutions.
Right, but I think you're asking about safeguards. What kind of safeguards can be?
Yes. Without violating the principles of democracy.
Oh, okay. I mean, I'm not sure that I have the exact answer to the question about safeguards.
Why don't you?
I think it's a very complicated question. I think that we can, as I said earlier a little bit, I think that we can try and incorporate certain safeguards, and from where I sit and the work that I do, it's really about making sure that individual citizens are also involved in whatever it is that we're imagining for that future, right? To make sure that they are included in, as we were talking about, the work that I do is all about sort of thinking beyond the elections and how do we bring them in. And so I think that, I don't know, some of you may have been last night at Paul Magnet's presentation. It is one of the most innovative ideas around political party drafting their mandate, which is including citizens in a representative kind of way through sortition to make sure that those voices are included in any platform that a political party might put together. And I think that's one way that you could think about populist parties making sure that they are really representing the voice of the people more broadly.
Great, because I mean, we're a little over time, so if anyone wants to say one last thing, that would be great.
Just one sentence. The biggest problem today is that if authoritarianism is coming, it's going to present itself as the savior of democracy. Because the biggest problem is that many people in a highly polarized society believes that the most dangerous thing for democracy is the other party to win. So from this point of view, having a government that is ready to lose power and to get out of power after losing elections, in my view, this is critically important. When you see governments imprisoning their opposition, you know that something goes wrong.
If I may, just for 10 seconds.
Yes, of course.
At the top-down level, in the European Union, which is not populist insofar as the majority of the parties in parliament is concerned, we should be not doubling, but 10 times the investment in culture, in modern culture. This is the way you influence. Culture is always ahead of politics. Society is always ahead of institutions. So if you want to reduce populism in a democratic way, that is investment in culture. Insofar as what you can do as young people in society, when you find these populists out on the street, you've got your phone or whatever, squeeze them with questions. Ask them, what are you going to do? No, tell me, above what tax bracket will you tax? Where are you going to find the funds? You've got an undisrupted way to hold them accountable. So just do it. Have fun with it.
Very good. Listen, thank you. We've now solved the problem of populism. So thank you all very much.